All right, so we're about to talk about something that I have been saying for years, and I'm just putting this out here because it's one of my pet topics. I don't think this is going to do well in the algorithm. I don't know how much people are really going to care about this, but one of my very first like political hot takes, and I'm talking way back from like middle school, was that, hey, Google seems to have a monopoly over a lot of things, and it should probably be broken up. And whenever people talk about, social media censorship, when they talk about all of these things, it is all related to the fact that these giant tech companies have massive monopoly power over so much of our lives. And I have a little bit of good news to report on this issue. Recently, Google lost a lawsuit with Epic Games, and I'm not rooting for Epic Games, but in this situation, I am, where Epic, I don't know if you guys remember, but they have this game called Fortnite, right? Some of our audience might be aware of it, and they made a mobile version. And they were like, oh, this is the biggest game ever of all time. We're going to charge people directly in our app for in-app purchases. And Google and Apple were like, no, you can't do that. You have to go through our Play Store and give us money because we have monopoly control over phones. And they lost their lawsuit with Apple, Epic did, but they won their lawsuit with Google. And I'm not a good enough lawyer to tell you why they
I
lost
was
one
gonna
or
ask, like,
the
what was
other.
the difference in the
I
arguments?
really don't know. I was reading it and I was like, this is beyond. I think it was just like Google had a worse defense than Apple did.
Yeah, hey.
But essentially this court said that, hey, this is a monopoly. And of course, this is going to be appealed. This is going to take years and years more. But if Google doesn't win this appeal, they're going to lose monopoly control over the Android phone. You're going to see other app stores be able to pop up and place their apps. And if they lose monopoly control over that, well, now we can start looking at their monopoly control over YouTube, their monopoly control over advertising. I work in marketing. They have a massive amount of the advertising pie and totally put their fingers on the scales in order to make themselves more money. All of these things are things that we can change as a society. We just have to like understand what they do and talk about them more, I think. And so I really hope people are interested in this. TJ, when I sent this over to you, were you like, this is an interesting
Yeah, I
topic?
didn't expect that. I was like, oh, okay, I didn't hear about it, but
Yeah.
one of the things I liked the most about the article was when you said that Google's defense was kind of shoddy. I believe it just from one sentence that I read in that article where it said, actually, we have fierce competition with Apple. I was like, really? That's the argument you're going with? It's like there's two heavyweights and pretty much nobody else. I was like, oh, so it's a duopoly. That's your argument. That's what you're going like. That's kind of wild. Now the monopoly thing is that hasn't been like a huge interest of mine for a long time, but I do remember actually around the same age in middle school. It wasn't Google back then. I was just reading about it was Microsoft where they broke apart Microsoft, and I started reading more and more about antitrust laws and everything, and Teddy Roosevelt and trust busting. Honestly, a lot of it because trust busting was a cool sounding word. That's probably why I got into it.
Teddy
But
Roosevelt, trust busting.
trust busting,
I'm a
yeah,
middle school boy. This sounds good.
right. He's got a proton pack and shit. But no, it's like it is staggering how common monopolies are. Like TR is rolling over in his grave right now. Like all this work I put into breaking up monopolies, and they're everywhere. And reading about Google and how they charge you to use their applications to sell through there and everything, monopolize the entire thing. It reminded me of another weird monopoly that we're all kind of okay with, and that it was not monopoly, but it's just like a predatory system is buying a car. Like you can't buy a car directly from a car company. Except Tesla, oddly enough, like that's like the only one where you can. But car dealers, like they have their own little niche on there that you can only buy through there. And then we've all seen like that chart in supermarkets where like 5 companies own everything in the entire supermarket. What is it? Internet network providers have many monopolies all throughout areas. Like you can pretty much only use one source. And
If
it is,
if
I
you live
did,
in the Philadelphia area, you know that you only have one option,
yeah,
most of the time. Like I don't know other areas, but
yeah, it's like that everywhere. Like everywhere I've been, like one internet cable provider, whatever, that's pretty much all you can use. And I first, like in the army, I ran into this first. Like you could only use Time Warner, which is the worst. They're horrible. I hated everything about Time Warner. But everywhere else you might have a smaller option, but it's just one organization that controls everything, and they get away with it. At least like with a lot of examples where like diversity of the illusion of choice, and you can buy all these different options here when it's the same person every time. And I always thought, I still think this actually. I think that if you're selling products and you have like one company that owns 500 different small companies, you should be legally required to put the name of the actual company on there. Now, no matter what the brand is, like Coke owns Aquafina, like it should be Aquafina, Coca-Cola right on there. So that. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
No, I was just like a Coke product. Like I've seen that before, like when they want to put the brand name
Yeah,
on, and so they can do it.
Like Pepsi owns Gatorade. I don't see Pepsi anywhere, like on the Gatorade thing. And so this it's so with the case though, it is kind of encouraging. I'm not super encouraged about it, but it is one domino falling because like the system will collapse, and breaking apart monopolies is a very important step. And I was glad to see it, and I would be worried if I were Apple though. I would be, because now you have precedent set for essentially the exact same thing.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to do a little anecdote to say something you said. So if you guys want a nice flowing conversation on monopolies, I go ahead and skip ahead 60 seconds here. But what you just mentioned of putting the brand on the other product, I don't know, are you aware of like Sonic the Hedgehog? I imagine you've heard of,
I know who he is. Yeah, I played the games.
Have you noticed that a lot of the Sonic games feel like, especially in the past, couple decades, that they're phoning it in? And the reason for that is so interesting. It's because they are. Because the larger company that owns Sonic, I forget what exactly their name is, they're a gambling company. They sell those, they make those machines that they have in Japan where like you put the money in and a little ball comes out. If you have gotcha games. And they're like they're a gambling company. They have that smell on them. And they bought Sonic just so Sonic could be their mascot, and they could be like, we're the Sonic guys.
So cool.
And they don't care about the game. They're just like, it makes them like 0.2% of their revenue. They just want the Sonic name to like not sound like a gambling company. And so like that's why all of those companies don't want to do that, because they purposely do these things to mess with our perception of what these brands are. Anyway, back to the main point about monopolies. The interesting thing about this entire argument about monopolies is that it really is a right-wing argument. Like it is, if you look at like free market, you want to be pure free market as you can. Even like the most staunch libertarians will go like, yeah, no, monopolies are pretty darn bad, because if you think about it, all of the good things about free market economics and allowing competition don't exist if there's a monopoly. You might as well have a nationalized company that doesn't have profit motive if you're going to have a monopoly, because what possible benefit do we have as a society of not nationalizing it? It doesn't do anything for us except transfer money to the people who own the company.
It's because like libertarians and right wingers who worship at the altar of the free market, they genuinely believe with their whole heart that if you just let go of regulations and unleash the power of the creative mind, that a monopoly wouldn't exist. Like they would compete into infinity and no one would ever corner the market. And it's like, wow, like you guys always like throw out the Econ 101 line. Like, man, that is Econ 101. Like there is no chance that's going to happen, because eventually someone's going to get ahead in one way. And you're a big enough company, you get ahead by 1 or 2%, you can take off real quick. I mean, you can just destroy the competition. And also, it doesn't factor into the equation that once you start making this money, you do more than just invest in your company and pay your shareholders to make more money. You also start lobbying the government to get things done in your favor to help cripple your competition. It won't take long for the monopoly to form at all. And it's just, it is kind of crazy that, they're that blind, that obvious shit. I was very happy to find out this tidbit of information, though, that Sonic is apparently Homelander. You know how like in The Boys, like Homelander thinks he's the important person. No. We're a pharmaceutical company. You're just a goofy ass mascot. And Sonic is that way with gambling. I didn't know that. that's so cool. And like it's weird, this kind of topic, but I was Nintendo, which speaking of predatory companies, Nintendo is just the worst there. It is so sad too, because people have a lot of nostalgic bond with Nintendo. So when they charge $70 for a Zelda game, yeah, I'm buying it. Am I happy about it? No, but I am gonna buy it.
Yep.
And Nintendo is has always been a gaming company, but they were like a board game company in like the 1800s or something. And then they, 100 years later, they stumbled across this video game thing and it took off. So it is funny seeing how companies, shift fire like that. I can't think of another example. There's like a logging company that came into making vehicles and stuff. But yeah, this it's also weird when people have, like, we talked about this earlier. John and I were discussing brand loyalty and how weird that is. That people will just like die at the altar of Adidas. It's like, oh man, would these people really care about me? No, they don't. They would sell you out in a heartbeat. They will sell their own people out in a heartbeat just for a few extra nickels. And I don't know. It's just we're weird, man. We're weird and stuff that we fawn and fascinate over.
We are, and I want to circle back to the libertarian argument you mentioned, because I hear that all the time, and it
Yeah,
pisses
all the
me off
time.
when they're like, "Oh, well, if you didn't have regulation, you didn't have a government to enforce monopoly. Government's what creates monopolies." And it's like, okay, explain to me how this situation would be avoided without government. Explain to me how it would ever be possible for phone manufacturers to just not make a monopoly on their devices? Like what, by what market mechanism would that be happening? In because like Apple and Google are already doing this in a regulated environment. Why would they just not do this? If we just got rid of all the regulation tomorrow, the most powerful people would just become more powerful. Like,
It's I call libertarianism astrology for dudes. It's just complete, absolute nonsense. And for some reason they believe in, except astrology is harmless, it's not hurting anybody. Like fighting for libertarianism actually does. And what I read down here, what do you think the goal of a business owner is? Like, why for other words, like, what do you think they are ultimately trying to do? Are they ultimately trying to create parity in the market, trying to create, dozens of competitors? No. Every day when they get up and go to work, their thought is, how can I become as close to a monopoly as I possibly can? That's what they're going for. So why would you think that wouldn't happen? I don't get it. Like it just it's
at
I
least
remember
we
when
acknowledge that like governments can be bad.
yeah. And,
We need
and
checks and balances to make sure our governments don't kill us. But they're like, oh no, but the private
no,
companies, they're just
no,
pure motives. They'll never
exactly.
hurt
Well,
us.
they all think that they would be Jeff Bezos. They all think that if I just had the dadgum government out of the way, I could be. No, you would be, a slave to one of the 4 trillionaires on planet Earth, just like the rest of us. That's what would happen to you. And the courts thing you brought up is interesting too, because they're not big fans of that. And so you start going down this rabbit hole with them, and it's like, okay, well, if the government doesn't have a monopoly of violence, how do you enforce contracts? How do you enforce commerce? How do you enforce protection? And then the answers get weird, because it's like, oh, well, you could hire, you could have private courts or private force. Like,
Mm-hmm.
all right, do you guys not see
You
where this
not,
is
yeah,
going here?
right? It's so like it's so dumb and
It's
obvious.
so
Like
dumb.
it always comes down to whoever can buy the most guns is just gonna make the rules. That's it's also how our government works, by the way. They have the most guns and they make the rules.
Right.
Like, but we
And
at
that's
least with their government, we get to like have a say in
yes.
those rules. Is it always
Yes.
the best? No, it often sucks. But at least there's some mechanism for feedback other than put your hands up or die.
Yes. And it's so funny that they always go with the, well, if I don't do this, men with guns are going to show up. Buddy, that's going to be the answer no matter what. I hate to break it to you. Like, it's like, it's going to be men with guns, but it's going to be, a robber baron somewhere with like no accountability whatsoever to hire as many guns as he can. And he's going to rule everything. It's like, it's so incredibly myopic. I like libertarianism made sense to me when I was like 13. I was like, oh
Mhm.
yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And then it's like, oh wow, this is the dumbest thing I've ever come across. And the fact that grown men look at this. So I wonder what did they say about this Google thing? I wonder. Like, we went to like a libertarian forum or something, or a page is like, what would they say about the government trying to break up this monopoly? Because my gut tells me like, oh, that's good. but I don't like the government's doing it. I don't know. Like, I'm curious what they would say about that.
I know the libertarians that I cross paths with on TikTok would say that, oh, well, the only reason Apple and Google have the ability to do this is because of government regulation. And if we just like didn't ever have government regulation, they would have never been able to get to this size. That is legitimately the libertarian economic argument that is made in these cases, which to I always say, well, we're not starting from year one, and we're starting with the current state of the earth, and they would still have this power. They would still be able to do this, and there's no market forces that would be able to stop them. That's it. But I do think I could shit on libertarians all day. But we are fighting a straw man a little bit. Let's back up here. Yeah, no, it exists. The argument exists, but there are reasonable people who have reasonable issues with. I don't necessarily think this. I think even most Republicans would be like, oh no, yeah, fuck Google. But like I think that there are reasonable arguments to be made that sometimes the government overregulates. 100% correct. This isn't one of them. And this is one of those issues. I talk about them a lot that I think can be a wedge issue to bring Republicans over to our side. Because if you look back at the history of America, like, if we want to get traditionalist with this shit, like, if a lot of people know the story, at least a lot of people who like are interested in film, about how like the big movie studios got busted up back,
Yep.
what was it, the 40s, 50s? And it was antitrust laws and a lot of people do actually know this, that like, oh, well, the movie studios, they owned the actors, they owned the directors, they owned the production, they owned the IP, they owned the movie theaters, and they owned the distribution, and they manipulated stuff. And everyone was like, oh no, that kind of makes sense. Yeah, that would be kind of like they would be able to overcharge us and make bad things happen. And they did. And a lot of Americans can like identify with that and be like, yeah, no, that's wrong. We should break that up. But if we look at where all of these companies are going now, it is worse than it was back then.
Yeah.
The consolidation is incredible. Just look at what literally is happening with film again. You have Time Warner, HBO, times thousands of other shell companies inside of them. Like, they literally own the IP. They have like exclusive contracts with actors and directors. They have all of the actual production capital to put behind it. And now again, they own the theaters. They don't own the theaters this time, but they own the streaming distribution platforms. And it's like, how is that any different than what we have already broken up? It isn't. It's the same thing with Google and Apple owning the app stores and saying only apps we approve and pay us money to be on these phones are allowed to be on them. It is not good for anyone except the company that owns the platform. And we don't have to accept that. We can use our collective bargaining power to tell them, no, you can't do that. It is totally within, the idea of free market economics to do so. And we just have to get together and do it.
Yeah, it's what you mentioned there with conservatives saying that, well, it's because of regulations this happened in the first place. It is the laziest argument ever, because whenever someone says that, they're like, well, I'm just against all these regulations. I was like, okay, which regulations are you talking about? Because yes, some regulations are absurd. Some regulations don't make any sense, or at least don't make sense to me, like someone who's not part of the actual industry. But yeah, if you want to say some regulations are bad, yeah, of course we're on board here. But to just blanket it and say we should have no regulations like that, you can't possibly think that's a good idea. Like, and then they do say that a lot, don't they? They're like, oh, the regulations are helping the big business. So you're telling me the big businesses want these regulations? That's what you're arguing. Like, let's look at their donation record and see which bills they're fighting to support, which ones they openly advocate for, and which ones they're spending money against. I guarantee it's not the ones saying, you need to have more safety regulations, or you need to lessen up on your, cracking down on unions. That's not going to be the ones that they're standing for. And you mentioned media and how that's such a great comparison, how we're actually going back to where things were, 80, 90 years ago, where you had these top-down industries. The one I talk about the most is the elephant in the room is Disney, and how I remember seeing, I think it was last year, that Disney officially owned like 53% of all media in the United States. Like, Disney owns ESPN. It owns ABC. I think it owns
Yep.
Hulu.
Yep.
It owns Star Wars. It owns Marvel.
Mhm.
It is wild that we allow this to happen. And then you mentioned the other like bunch of HBO and Time Warner and stuff. This cannot go, and the streaming services, like this is something that we can all relate to. That
Mhm.
streaming services started off as something, oh, it's very convenient. I can go to Netflix and watch all these movies. Now, I'll stop, paying $100 a month for cable. And now instead you have 5 streaming services to watch. Also, you're just back to where you were in the first place. And it's really inconvenient. So yeah, I don't think the regulations are the problem here. I don't think that there's too many rules on these guys. Like it's a nightmare, and we all know it, and it's wild that people keep defending it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, if you guys have any thoughts about monopolies, I don't know. We're in this content creator bubble. But I do genuinely think that this is a wedge issue. So let us know in the comments if maybe you're conservative watching this. Do you agree that monopolies need to be broken up, like the ones that Google and Disney have? And I can probably name a couple other companies that conservatives don't like, but it really shouldn't matter where the political stripes of the company. Do you think monopolies need to be more regulated? Let us know in the comments and like and subscribe for more content coming this week.